One of the most fundamental abilities when it comes to shooting is being able to operate with iron sights, but does your gun even have them anymore? Yes, an optic is a great upgrade, but nothing is going to compare in terms of reliability when it comes to a classic set of metal iron sights. So in today's lesson, we're going to be giving you all the information you need to know to be able to not only install, zero, but also operate your iron sights. Seems like a good place to start. Let's do that. We have to accept the fact that if we're not using the sights the way they were designed to be used, then trying to zero them in becomes pretty much useless. There are two main types of iron sights, open and aperture. If it just has a simple notch for aligning with the front sight, then it's likely an open sight. With these, the goal is usually to have the top of the front post centered and lined up with the top of the rear sights. The intended point of impact should then be located just above the front sight. However, if there's a window that you need to look through, then this is considered an aperture sight, also known as a peep sight. Like the open sight, if there's a post at the front, then we simply place it in the middle of the circle, with the target on top. Alright, now that we know how to use them, let's see if the set that we have is quality and even worth attempting to install. Have you ever zeroed in a set of sights before, only to find out that after a few matches your shot grouping has drifted? It could be because the sights are loose or damaged, so we need to take a moment to inspect them before attempting to dial them in. Any loose parts that are drifting on their own are just going to cause your aim to also drift with it. Make sure your rail connection hardware is still solid and working as it should. If you have a set of folding sights like this, then you want to make sure that when they snap into position that they're not moving around too much. You also want to make sure that anything that actuates is doing so smoothly and locking into place. Take a couple of minutes on this step so you better understand your sights and what to expect from them. Then we're ready to install them. Now you might be thinking at this point, how can you install iron sights wrong? Well, there's a few ways. Yeah, this is pretty painful to look at for me too, don't worry. But what we're going to do is go over everything that's wrong and fix it. As you saw before, we had the riser as part of that equation, and the only time that you'd really want to do that is in the scenario where they're both on the riser at the same time. If you're installing iron sights, they need to be on the same height, otherwise they just won't work. The rear sight can usually be identified by the one with the windage and elevation adjustments. If there are any writing or indications, those usually go towards the back of the gun for the shooter to see. Pretty sure the enemy doesn't care how many degrees of offset you're using anyway. Some front sights, they will screw up and down the center post, and that will allow you to adjust when you're zeroing in your sights. When you're zeroing and you have a rear sight that looks like this, always do the up and down from the front sight and not here. Have this set to the lowest setting, and then when you're on the field and you need to make dynamic adjustments, that's when you adjust it. When you're using iron sights, you should be focused on the front sight as you're aiming. So in order to figure this out, what you can do is bring the rifle up to your shoulder and look where this front sight naturally falls into your focus point. The distance between the back of each one of your sights is what's known as your sight radius. The further apart they are, the more accurate your shots can be because deviations aren't as dramatic. When you're setting up aperture sights, you want to make sure you're using the smallest setting because you don't want it to become too inaccurate. This circle should perfectly line up around the circle of your front post. Folding sights like this, you also have to consider where they're going to be sitting when they're folded down. So that looks like a good distance there. We'll lock that in for now. So in order to make sure that your shots are as lined up as possible, move this front and back until you find this circle lining up very well with the front sight. So for me, it appears the most comfortable spot is actually right towards the rear. So we're just going to lock it in there. Ultimately, this is going to come down to your preference, but just make sure that you're keeping all these little elements in mind. We started by setting up our target around 50 feet away, but keep in mind that you may want to zero your rifle for a different range. Now, here are the tools that are going to help us get some efficient results. The first one on the list, nice solid platform for you to shoot off of. Secondly, we've got some different colored markers so we can mark off the exact shots and which group they came from. So we're going to start off with black for our worst grouping, orange for our second one, and green for hopefully our good one at the end. Moving quickly along, we've got a foregrip / bipod attachment. This will give us the stability we need to get a good shot. Before we even start, I want to go over a couple of things. I'm not going to fully explain setting your hop up. That's for its own video. But what I do want you to be considerate of is where your BB is during its flight path when it's hitting that target. With proper firearms, the grouping is very tight, but with Airsoft, we have to accept the fact that our grouping is going to be much wider. I'd say it makes sense to shoot about 10 to 15 times minimum before you even bother checking the target. We also want to make sure that we're using the smallest sight possible to give us the most refined picture possible, and also shooting from the wall, as we mentioned in our last video. These sights are really messed up. I did that intentionally, but let's see how close they are. All right, so it looks like we've got one outlier, but everything seems to be grouped around this circle here. This circle, when I place it down, that's going to be where I reference the center of the grouping to be roughly. It's an estimate. If this is our grouping, that means our correction needs to be 4.5 squares to the right and 2 squares down. That should bring this circle right to the middle. So the first thing we're gonna do is the 4.5 off to the right that we said we needed to do. So we've got our little label here. It says right, and we're going to hear those clicks. What we do need to remember is that these clicks are MOA, which is a minute of angle, and typically that equates to about an inch at every 100 yards. So that's about an inch every 300 feet. At this range, we're sitting at about a quarter of the range, which means it's going to take about a quarter of the adjustment to get the desired result. So what I'm going to do first is going to start by pulling my rear sight to the right by 1 click. And we also need to correct for the up and down, so we're going to do that now. We needed to go down, which means our sight needs to go up, so loosen it out of its thread. All right, using the data that I got from the target, I've input everything into the sights, and I'm just going to fire another 10-15 shots and see what the result is. All right, let's hit it with the orange marker now. So this is our grouping, and if I were to average that out, I want to say it's somewhere around here. It's about half a square up and about 1 square to the right. So we've got our new measurements up here, 1 right and half up. So we're going to take that and put that into the gun now. So the final correction is 1 right, half up. So I'm just going to punch that in quickly. Now, if my calculations are correct, this should be the last marker we need. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd say that's pretty friggin' close to the middle in terms of the grouping. So at this point, you're really splitting hairs, especially with airsoft guns. This is the type of improvement you can see if you spend the time properly zeroing your sight. Now, in a recent poll to our community about what learning style was preferred, the vast majority voted for hands-on learning. And the best way I can think of promoting that is with, well, please don't hate me, homework. Don't worry, I won't be checking if you've done it, but the onus is on you if you really want to improve. Let me know in the comments what you think of this idea, and thank you to everyone who voted. Now, get out there and zero those iron sights, or maybe you have a scope. Well, we've got a lesson for that here too. Thanks so much for watching. Class is dismissed. I can't even remember the 1 right, half up. 1 right, half up. I'm not going to forget again.